Morning. I'm Greg Pretty. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for the National Interest. And this morning we have a panel that we're going to be doing on Iran and the political outlook for Iran in the wake of the death of President Raisi in the helicopter crash a couple of weeks ago, and the upcoming elections, and also the whole issue of succession with Ayatollah Khamenei being 85 years old, and whether that has any implications there. I have with me today two very distinguished guests. Dr. Hamidreza Azizi is a visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin. He has taught at Shahid Beheshti University and also the University of Tehran. He holds a Ph.D. in regional studies from the University of Tehran. Alex Svitanka is the founding director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute here in Washington, a senior fellow in Middle East studies at the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School, and an adjunct professor at Demise at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He's been a senior analyst at Jane's Information Group in London, and he was born in Iran and educated at Sheffield University and Essex University in the UK. And without any further ado there, I'm going to hand over the floor to Alex for his introductory remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. It's good to be with you. Thanks to the national interest, and looking forward to sharing this discussion with Hamidreza, who I'm in a panel discussion for the first time. Looking forward to it. Look, I wanted to sort of set the stage first in terms of the elections. I'll plan to talk about 10 minutes, and then I will sort of hopefully get into some of those questions in terms of where Iran's strategic policies are going. If there are questions in that regard, happy to take them. But let me just start off by talking about where we are in this election process. When people hear the word election, they think about the elections they know best, depending on where you sit in the world. Islamic Republic happens to have a very sort of unique election system, if you want to call it that. I mean, you could even say it's not really much of an election since it's so regulated, but that's what I want to get into. So we have right now a 5-day registration period. So this is when they say snap election, they're not kidding. You have a 5-day registration period, which I believe ends on Monday, has already started. I was just looking at Iranian news sources saying 33 people have registered. 5 of those have basically met the criteria. So this registration period will end. After that, the really important part of this process starts, which is the vetting, the screening of candidates who actually will be allowed to run. That's a job left to the Guardian Council. They have about a week to look at the files of people that are going to be approved. I'm cynical on this. I think people who are going to be allowed to run are actually decided elsewhere, and the Guardian Council's job is just a formality. There are 12 members in the Guardian Council. These people, all of them directly or indirectly, are under the control of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and his inner circle. So don't expect any, surprises here. He has more or less the sort of sufficient control to make sure he can at least micromanage the process, if that's what he ends up choosing to do. And to give you some examples here, in 2021, the last time Iran had presidential elections, 585 were disqualified, including Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the two-term president from 2005 to 2013. He's someone who might throw his hat in the ring again anytime. Most likely he will. And most likely he will be disqualified to run. And that gives you a sense of how this screening process, how tough it is to get through. Once everybody's been sort of approved to run, you will have a 15-day campaigning period. Again, those in the United States, elsewhere, that might be used to long campaign periods, it is going to last about 2 weeks. There might be a second round to this election, depending if somebody gets the 50% of the vote or not. If not, there will be a second round. But again, it's going to be over way faster than, say, countries that like United States and elsewhere in the West. So the big question, as I said before, is will Khamenei open the door in this election to reformists and moderates? To me, he is more likely to do the opposite and micromanage the process the way he did back in 2021 to make sure his preferred candidate wins. Now, it's not easy to say who his preferred candidate will be. That's really tough to sort of call. But we know, for example, in 2021, he wanted Raisi clearly to win. Out of the about 600 people who registered, 7 were allowed to run, and Raisi came out as the winner in that highly regulated or engineered election process. 2024 is different than 2021. I would say the main big difference is that the economy is in a much worse place than it was in 2021. But I think Khamenei's fundamental policy instinct hasn't changed, and that is to make sure that the election process is controlled sufficiently that it doesn't throw out any surprises. The fact is the presidency in the wrong hands at this moment in time for the 85-year-old Ali Khamenei can create complications, if you will, that might jeopardize some of the plans that he surely has for his succession. So for that reason, I think he's not going to gamble. You know, the argument you hear is you've lost the Iranian public opinion. Why don't you create some enthusiasm, excitement? People might want to refer to Mohammad Khatami's election of 97, or even Hassan Rouhani's 2013. Bring the people back in to support the regime, create some legitimacy. I doubt very much is going to do that. I don't think Khamenei is in the mood to gamble like that. What he wants is nothing but obedience for whoever's going to sit in the presidential palace for the next 4 years. And that's it. And for that reason, I think, it's going to be a candidate that we can for sure consider to be a loyalist and perhaps not a yes man the way Ebrahim Raisi was, but certainly not someone who's going to challenge Khamenei. He has still, I have to say, a balancing act to perform. As I said, there is a huge amount of anger in Iranian society. So don't expect competitive elections, but do expect some token reformist moderates to be included on the list of people allowed to run. It won't be Javad Zarif, who I understand has already said he's not going to run. Be someone like the previous reformist candidate, Abdul Nasser Hemmati, or perhaps someone of that caliber, someone that we know about, but isn't going to create that much of enthusiasm. So Khamenei and his people can say, we did have reformist moderates in the race, they just didn't win the vote. I think that's how it's going to play out. I also think plenty of hardline candidates will be disqualified. So key sort of factor here to be able to run in Iranian elections is what do you fit in Khamenei's master plan? Anybody can be nixed, anybody can be disqualified, and we'll find out early next week. There are speculation out there that the interim president, Mohammad Mokhber, will be the one who will get the job, perhaps, the permanent with the 4-year term. I think that's doubtful. I think that requires a huge amount of election fraud, since the man is not going to win in a fair election. So, I will get to some names in a minute, but I just want to put Mokhber's sort of future, at least in my mind, out there and suggest that he is going to be that interim president. Khamenei's minions, if you will, in Iranian media are already saying anybody who is connected to the reform movement, the Green Movement of 2009, anybody who sort of has a record of standing up to Khamenei will not be allowed to run. And I think that already kind of tells us what sort of election to expect. Among those who have registered so far, the fault line is not between reformists, moderates, and hardliners. It's actually fight among hardliners. Sort of, if you will, hardliners that are a bit closer to the center, and then the ones at the far end of the spectrum. Ali Larijani is the one name who has already come out and registered. He wasn't allowed to run in 2021. That's a whole different story. If people are interested, we can get into it. But he's on the centrist front. He's someone that I guess his supporters hope can get some support from the reform moderate electoral base. It's a big hope, but that's what they think Ali Larijani might be able to pull off. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you got among the names so far, and I can add a lot of more names to it, but Saeed Jalili is the one who represents the hard line at the other end of the spectrum. He's someone who has failed in the past as a presidential candidate, but he is close to the Supreme, and he's close to Ali Khamenei as his representative at the Supreme National Security Council, not liked by voters, but certainly a political star of sorts for the far right in Iranian political system today. So I would just say one thing to watch out for is not political fights between reformists and hardliners. Look for the fight among the hardliners. That, in many ways, I think is going to be the story of the next few years, because the reformist moderates are essentially politically insignificant. They're not in a place to be able to shake things up. If the fight is going to be nasty and consequential for where the regime is going, it's the fight that's happening among the hardline camp, as I said, between likes of Ali Larijani and Saeed Jalili. And whether Khamenei can control this infighting, that is his big challenge, because if he can control that big infighting among hardliners, if it gets nasty, as it did in the Majlis elections just a few months ago back in March, that's where his succession plans that he hopes will be micromanaged nicely might not be able to be pulled off the way he had perhaps envisioned in his head. We'll find out a lot more about the candidates. Let me just throw out one maverick name, Ahmadinejad. I mentioned him before. Interesting candidate to watch. He's a man who stayed in Iran and can really embarrass Khamenei, if you will. It's going to be a candidate I'll be watching out for his positions, and it can be pretty entertaining because he is very much a populist, if you will, and does put some pretty tough questions out there to the likes of Ali Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards generals. A compromise candidate could be someone like the former foreign minister, Ali Akbar Salehi. No big enemies, might be able to just bring enough people out to vote to give this Islamic Republic or save the Islamic Republic from a public humiliation, because frankly, trend for voting in the Islamic Republic has been going downwards now for a good number of years. And let me just finish off here, Greg, in terms of big implications. No change in regime direction, unless if Khamenei decides to open up the political space and you have something that looks like a free election. I don't see any signs of that. He wants to consolidate. He's a first-generation revolutionary. He's part of the team that brought the Shah down in '79. And if you ask this group of people, what did the Shah do that brought him down, they will say he made concessions when he shouldn't have made concessions. That's the historic lesson they've learned from '79. And I don't think they're going to make, this lot's not going to make any concessions. It's an opportunity for reformists, for people of Iran to mobilize if there is a mass disqualification by the Guardian Council at the behest of Khamenei. That's always there. The anger is always there. But I don't see any coordinated reformist campaign. I don't see any agenda that you can point to say, well, they seem to be getting ready for when the day comes, they're told you can run, i.e. next week, you can run. They're going to mobilize, they're going to come out and they're going to demand a right to run. If that's happening, they're very quiet about it. I don't see much of a campaign on that front. And yeah, I mean, as I said, I don't see any major change in terms of Iran's nuclear policies, what it's doing in the region, or some of its more controversial domestic policies, such as, you know, the enforcement of the mandatory veil on women and that sort of thing. So let me stop there, Greg. I know we'll talk about the nuclear issue, regional foreign policy more in detail, but I just want to lay out the sort of landscape as I see it in terms of this election process.
Thanks, Alex. Hamid?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Many thanks to you, Greg, and the Center for the National Interest for organizing this event and inviting me. It's also a pleasure to be on a panel with Alex. So I actually start from where Alex ended on the potential changes. And I fully agree that we are not going to we shouldn't expect major changes as a result of Raisi's death, whether in domestic politics or in foreign policy. So I try to shed a bit of light on the foreign policy side of things, actually, and to explain why we shouldn't anticipate major transformation. Much has been said about the fact that actually it's the supreme leader who's in charge of basically setting the priorities, strategic priorities of the country in foreign and domestic politics, and also the role of the IRGC. But, you know, one of the things I've been monitoring, and actually I wrote a paper on that before Raisi's death, it's going to be published hopefully soon, is the changes that actually happened in the past 3 years since Raisi came to power. I mean, not under Raisi or as a result of, you know, directly as a result of Raisi's presidency, but as a result of the overall shifts in the political system that Alex elaborated, and what I call basically a move toward more securitization, militarization, and authoritarianism of the whole political system. So first of all, actually, apart from the traditional influence that the Supreme Leader and the IRGC have had in foreign policy, we saw actually some attempts at legalizing, basically formalizing this sort of parallel institutes and parallel influences in Iranian foreign policy. One example was the so-called development plan. So Iran has this tradition of setting 4-year development plans. So the latest one became kind of controversial, which actually was finally ratified in January. But one of the controversial aspects was that it would exempt some key institutions like the Atomic Energy Agency organization of Iran, and also the Intelligence Ministry from coordinating with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that was alongside the already exempted kind of role of the IRGC, or better to say, the armed forces. So there was some backlash even from Raisi's foreign ministry, from the kind of technocratic body of the foreign ministry. And then in the end, they changed the law, but the armed forces remain exempt. So that says quite a lot, especially when it comes to Iran's regional policy, which is dominated by the IRGC. So it is important that, you know, this process is not rather informal. It's formal. It's part of the legal institution of the Islamic Republic that, you know, these entities act quite independently and autonomously. The second change that we've seen over the past 3 years has been some sort of an institutional shift, basically, in the sense that the role of the Supreme National Security Council has changed. I mean, there has been ups and downs. For example, when Ahmadinejad was president, I mean, before Rouhani's presidency, actually, the nuclear file was in the hands of the National Security Council. When Jalidi was there, also Ali Larijani for some time was the head of the secretary of the National Security Council. But then, at least since Rouhani came to power, until his final month in the office, the file was kind of managed by the foreign ministry and the person of Zarif. So in the last month of his presidency, it was again the Supreme National Security Council and Shamkhani, the person of Shamkhani, then secretary, who came and played a more important role. But after actually Shamkhani's dismissal and the appointment of Ahmadian, the new head of Ali Akbar Ahmadian, the new head of the SNSC, this has become even more sort of visible. I mean, on one hand, when it comes to the person of Ahmadian, he doesn't have the same profile and personal influence that Shamkhani had or still has. But at the institutional level, the role of SNSC has now extended also to some important files like, for example, Iran's northern neighborhood in the South Caucasus, and also a relationship with Russia and China. So Ahmadian has been the key figure, basically going capital to capital in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, attending the events in multilateral frameworks, putting forward actually initiatives for multilateral security cooperation with BRICS and the SCO. So again, this is another reason why, because that institution, I mean, of course, according to the Constitution, is tasked with basically providing a platform for a consensus building in foreign and security policy, the Council. But its direct role has become more prominent. And that is another reason, as I said, that we are not going to see much of a change. And interestingly, I mean, in the past few days, there were some rumors about Shamkhani, coming back and being handed over once again the kind of the nuclear file. That was denied, and then the official explanation actually was that it is actually still the Supreme National Security Council. Within that framework, we ask people with experience to come and give consultations, and Shamkhani is no exception, so it's not a big deal. So that's another element that we need to take into account here. And then at the functional, like on the ground, this kind of imbalance between the role of the Foreign Ministry and the IRGC has become kind of much more evident in the past few years. I refer to that famous leaked interview by Zarif when he was still Foreign Minister, in which he actually complained about what he would describe as the battlefield, i.e. the IRGC against diplomacy, or the Foreign Ministry. So he complained about diplomacy being dominated by the battlefield. So since Raisi came to power and under Amir Abdullahian as Foreign Minister, the Raisi administration actually boasted about coordination between this battlefield and diplomacy. But what happened exactly was that Amir Abdullahian became effectively the spokesperson for the IRGC and its Quds Force, and by extension, the spokesperson for the so-called axis of resistance. So we saw it clearly over the past few months since the start of the war in Gaza. He went capital to capital, from Beirut to Damascus and then to Doha to meet with the heads of these so-called resistance factions, and then, to basically present their views to the outside world. So in that sense, the function of the Foreign Ministry, that's what I want to say. The function of the Foreign Ministry actually was decreased to some sort of an agent and spokesperson of the IRGC in the case of the Foreign Minister himself. And the very interesting case actually was when, after the Iranian missile and drone strike against Israel, there were reports that, because of course Switzerland acts as the interest section of the United States in Tehran, and in the cases of cases like that, the Swiss ambassador would be called to the Foreign Ministry. This time, it was reported that the ambassador actually was called to the IRGC by the IRGC. So it was quite clear how this balance has changed. So just to conclude, I mean, for the reasons that I just mentioned, and the changes that were already sort of ongoing, but intensified and solidified over the past 3 years, we shouldn't expect major changes in Iran's foreign policy, be it in the region or in the nuclear file, on the nuclear issue, or more broadly speaking, on the diplomacy with the United States. There might be some, I mean, there is already reports of disruptions in the talks and also in cooperation with the IAEA. But the overall direction, if there is a strategic decision at the level of the Supreme National Security Council and endorsed by the Supreme Leader that there's a need for engagement, that's going to continue. I mean, of course, there's other variables like the US elections, etc. At the regional level, I think what the IRGC did in the sidelines of Raisi's funeral, basically inviting all the heads of Iran-backed groups and organizing a public event, actually, I mean, public session or meeting attended by those guys and also by the chief commander of IRGC and also the commander of the Quds Force. That was a clear message that the regional file that was already managed by the Quds Force is not going to change. So this is the sort of overall outline that I wanted to draw here.
Thank you, Hamid. I'd encourage our audience to submit questions with the Q&A feature that you have on the bottom taskbar on Zoom. Yeah, I had a couple of questions of my own that I wanted to start out with, or just follow-up issues I wanted to raise. And one of them, starting with Alex here, you've mentioned elsewhere the economic spoils that are at stake in succession here. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on how that drives some of the infighting, the business and financial side of that.
I wish I could give you precise information, Greg. As you can imagine, that's very tough to get our hands on. But we have enough here to sort of make the case that there are, and there should be, plenty of folks inside the Iranian regime machinery that would have questions, if not fears, about the impact on their personal situation inside the regime the day comes that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is no longer there. Let me give you an example. When Ayatollah Khomeini, the predecessor, was there from 1979 to 1989, 10 years, it was famous that he had probably no more than 50 or so staff in his, what they call the beit, the household, right, in the north of Tehran. It was a small group of people. He wasn't involved as a senior cleric in strategizing, white papers being produced, and so forth. So decisions were made. Usually, a request would come in. The person who allowed people to come and see the old man was his son, who died in 95. And that was the case back then. Now, Khomeini's successor, Ayatollah Khamenei, who's been there since June of 1989, 35 years, he has thousands, some estimates say 4,000. I don't know if anybody knows the exact number, but thousands of people that work in the office of the supreme leader. So, if there is a change, at the very top end, if there's a supreme leader that comes in that might want to bring his own people in, you're already in a position where you have a job, you have a reason to work. It's as simple as that, Greg. And I think, yes, it's not just about power. It's also about your access to money and so forth. Would that kind of a change at the top also have an impact on the Revolutionary Guards, the other main center of power in the Islamic Republic? In my mind, if there are two centers of power in the Islamic Republic, it's not the president. It's the Supreme Leader's office, the man himself, and the generals in the Revolutionary Guards. They are obviously not going to be as impacted by a change at the top when the Supreme Leader dies. But we know they have their own internal divisions. They don't say it in so many words, but just look at the last few months in terms of the post-Iranian parliamentary elections in March and the fight that was going on among the various candidates who we know were backed by different branches within the IRGC, or the Revolutionary Guards. So I think, yes, there is a lot of money and power at stake here. People will want to be at the winning side once the dust settles. How it's going to play itself out in terms of providing you with the sort of very minute details, that's tough because this is the Islamic Republic. Then it's very murky. But I have no doubt that, when someone has been in power for as long as Khamenei has, not just someone who is meticulously protective of his power, and he's meticulously involved in designing policy, certainly on strategic issues. When that somebody is no longer on the stage, anybody who's been working for that man, or anybody who aspires to join the supreme leader under the next supreme leader, has to start thinking about their options, how they would want to navigate this succession process, which is far more interesting for the future trajectory of the Islamic Republic than the presidential outcome on the 28th of June.
Thanks. Hamid, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it was quite clear, so nothing to add on that.
Okay. That segues quite nicely into my next question. I'd definitely like to hear from both of you on this one. How does this, there had been speculation that Raisi might be one of the people considered for succession to Khamenei eventually. Talk a little bit about the succession process for the supreme leader. Who is in play there, and what are the implications of the different potential outcomes, and how is that decision made?
So if I may go first,
Yeah.
I mean, it's because I mean, the Islamic Republic since establishment in 1979, they have had this experience only once, and Khamenei has been in power for a few decades, right? And now, and as Alex mentioned, there has been some deep institutional and structural changes in the whole system that makes everything different than the last and only succession that we have seen. So what I want to say is that the whole process is still ambiguous, and there's a lot of unknown, and whatever discussion we are seeing these days in media, in expert circles, it's more of a kind of more of speculations than concrete analysis, simply because these kind of behind the scenes factional rivalries and who is exactly in which camp, these sort of issues are not quite clear. There are signs indicating to some of these factional politics. For example, people who have been pushed out of the scene or in the current parliamentary round, for example, in the run-up to the election, how it turned out. These are the indications, but what I want to say is it's really difficult to predict. The debate has been around, I mean, of course, until the death of Raisi. The debate has been around two key figures, of course, the person of Raisi on one hand, and Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of current Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. This is one of the issues that has led some people also to speculate about the potential, for example, internal division leading to some, sabotage of some sort in the death of Raisi, for which we don't have any evidence, but just to give you a sense of how the debate is currently going. So in that sense, I mean, my personal understanding is that even if Raisi was seen as a candidate by some people in the so-called deep state, I know Alex has written about the deep state, so he has more to say about that. And so if he was a candidate for a camp within the establishment of the Islamic Republic, I think his poor track record in the past 3 years in terms of economic dysfunction and a lot of problems that arose, and also the sort of his cabinet basically being dominated by one faction of the conservative camp, which was the ultra hardliner, and that irritated some other parts of the conservative camp. These things actually maybe had already reduced his chances. Raisi was an important figure. I mean, his continuing role as president, I think, would be still a positive development for the establishment, in this case, especially the IRGC, and I would say even the office of the Supreme Leader, because first of all, he was a loyalist and also a weak loyalist, basically, who could be easily manipulated. That would mean that, the day after Khamenei's death, and the kind of people in high positions of power, I mean, including, of course, the three branches of the government, the presidency, the parliament, and the judiciary, those were trusted people. So my argument actually is that the challenge at this time, currently, is how to find someone who would serve exactly the same purpose of Raisi's presidency, and that is going to be quite difficult. And so based on that, there might be a need for a rethinking of the whole strategy for the succession, which makes it even more kind of unpredictable and ambiguous. This is actually what I can tell about the current circumstances.
Thank you. Now,
Yeah, if I may, I agree with Hamidreza's analysis. Just let me just continue along the same lines. Look, to Hamidreza's point, we don't have evidence what happened to that helicopter. That's a reality. We don't know what happened. I mean, there are lots of reasons to question what happened and question the official account of what happened. But so far, the people who are questioning it haven't given us the evidence. But let me just not defend the skeptics out there, but let's just point out that there's a long history in the Islamic Republic of suspicious deaths involving senior members of the regime. I mean, you have to go all the way back to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in late 1979 to Hashemi Rafsanjani in 2017. And without boring the audience with names here, trust me when I say there's a track record here of people who either disappear in the sense of suddenly dying and are no longer on the political stage, or be marginalized. And if you want to look at the ones who are marginalized, I mentioned one earlier in my remarks, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. I could point to Hassan Rouhani, Mohammad Khatami. This is a regime tent that's been shrinking over the years. And having your political opponents or anybody who doesn't do as you're told, sort of punish him one way or another has been the modus operandi, if you will, of the Supreme Leader's office and certainly of the Revolutionary Guard. So this helicopter crash was not the only one in the history of the Islamic Republic. And that's why people are so skeptical. In a country where you don't really have free press, people do wonder what really happened. Is it because Mujtaba Khamenei, the second son of this sitting Supreme Leader, is being groomed for the job? Big question. If people are interested in that, we can debate it. But I just want to point out that there's reason. This sort of line of thinking didn't just show up from nowhere. There's a context here which we need to keep in mind. And let me just point out to another context. Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the first and the only second Supreme Leader in the history of the Islamic Republic's 45 years, had actually a deputy Supreme Leader. Now, he fell out with that deputy Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Montazeri, but for the longest of time, the issue of succession wasn't an issue. It was Montazeri is going to take over when the old man leaves this world. Khamenei, very deliberately for 35 years, has not wanted to do that. Maybe he has good reasons. Maybe a deputy Supreme Leader can stand up to you and kind of embarrass you the way Montazeri arguably did with Khomeini in the 80s when there were political differences. I also think it's a reflection of Khamenei, the man. He doesn't really want to share the limelight as much. He wants to be the center of the attention. Nothing wrong with that, but just think that's his approach. And for a long time, not saying who he wants to succeed him has created this sort of competition of sorts. It's not a formal competition, but it's certainly out there. People are jockeying for maybe not their man to get the top job, but their network getting the top job. And Raisi, he was certainly a surprise when he became, well, certainly by 2021 when he became president and suddenly being mentioned as a Supreme Leader. That was a surprise. Everybody, including myself, said, well, perhaps that's an indication of what Khamenei plans to do. But then recent reports in the last few months and way before he died were showing us that his network, once they were at the presidential palace, started collecting as much money power as they could and were using it to create their own independent agenda that wasn't necessarily overlapping nicely with Khamenei, which is one of the reasons people are asking questions what really happened to that helicopter. But let me just finally say this, Greg. Any institution, this is not unique to Iran. If you follow the Catholic Church, we know that the next pope is not going to be chosen based on their theological qualifications and preferences. It's going to be involving politics. Politics in the Vatican is famous. There is politics in the Islamic Republic too. We just don't know enough about it. But what I want to say with that is the candidate, to my mind, if there is going to be another Iranian Supreme Leader, I mean, remember, this is a made-up concept that has been with us less than half a century. It was created in 1979, didn't exist before in Iran, doesn't exist anywhere else in Islam. It could disappear and we will forget about it in a decade or so after. But if there is going to be a third Supreme Leader, the key, and I think this is something Hamidreza mentioned, is to be able to be a candidate that's not going to be a danger to powerful groups in the regime, someone who can be tolerated. Raisi was that person. Raisi didn't have to, at least to begin with, power base of his own where the Revolutionary Guards generals would fear him, or Khamenei might fear him, or Khamenei's family for that matter. So you be able to be a consensus candidate in the sense of being sufficiently weak that you don't endanger those interest groups, I think is the key to success for whoever will get the job.
Thanks. I'm gonna ask one question that came in from one of our audience, Vafa Mustaqim, I think if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'll just read this verbatim. Some observers and politicians inside Iran are concerned about the hardliners' purification agenda and its impact on public participation. Some emphasize the importance of public legitimacy for the sustainability of the Nizam. Does public perception play a crucial role in the succession, even though it does not directly determine the outcome? Alex, if you could start.
I'm not exactly sure the purification process mentioned here, but I would say this. Certainly, the likes of Saeed Jalili that I mentioned before, the Paidari faction in the Islamic Republic, that in the last 15 years has sort of risen up to become the sort of stubborn bloc that doesn't want to negotiate with the West, that doesn't want to compromise in the nuclear issue, doesn't want to compromise in Iran's regional agenda, doesn't going to compromise with the majority of Iranians who are opposed vast majority of the policies of the Islamic Republic, including the enforcement of mandatory veil on Iranian women. You know, if the Saeed Jalili, which I doubt, but just say for the sake of argument, he becomes the next president, even if he is president, to a point that I've made, the president on strategic issues cannot veer away from the wishes of the supreme leader in the Revolutionary Guards. So he can be the face of more hardline policies in Iran and in the region and internationally, but only if he has the backing of the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guards. I don't think at this point an Iranian president is allowed to run. I mean, you could imagine a situation where Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is allowed to run, and yes, he might surprise everybody by pursuing different policies, but he's not going to be allowed to run. Very unlikely. So my point is, yes, purification sounds dangerous. And the person who might do it at the presidential palace, a Saeed Jalili type, will be certainly creating more resentment in Iranian society. But my point is, let's not overestimate the power of a president if they don't have the office of the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guards with them on any given agenda that they want to implement.
Hamid, did you have something to add to that? Yeah, I agree with what Alex said. I will just add some more context on this purification, maybe. We shouldn't forget that at the end of the day, it is, I mean, this campaign, which is called actually by the critics of it, and on top of them, Ali Larijani, who is just registered for the election. So he was kind of invented by the critics of that. This purification campaign is sort of rooted in Khamenei's statements and Khamenei's positions. You know, when he spoke about, for example, the second step of the revolution, which is, I would say, some sort of a re-revolutionizing of the Iranian politics and society, or when he basically spoke about, I mean, he pointed out the characteristics of people who he would like to see in office, like as in Persian, Javan Mu'min Anqalabi, the young, revolutionary, basically faithful people. So those are the ideological drivers of this purification campaign. So in that sense, I think the core of the Islamic Republic, which is the supreme leader, and of course the hardline camp, they really prioritize this over public participation. This is the first thing. And the second thing is that there's been this dilemma, at least over the past 2 decades, or better to say, since Khatami was elected as president, you know, this dilemma of allowing kind of more divergent figures to run, and then take the risk of those people to be elected, but at the same time guaranteeing broader public participation, or going for a safe sort of presidential campaign and electoral process. So I think at least since 2021, the Nizam, the system, made its decision to go for a safe path, especially with this looming succession issue, coming. And for that reason, and because this major driver of politics in today's Iran, which is the transition to post-Khamenei, still persists, I really don't see any reason why the system would, especially at this moment, would like to change course. And at the societal level also, we have seen kind of total disillusionment by people over this sort of quasi-election or quasi-democracy, because, for example, in the latest rounds of public protest, the Women Life Freedom movement, or before that, the slogans basically were directed at both hardliners and reformists. So for that reason, I mean, it makes basically allowing less reliable, less predictable people to run even more risky, because the system may end up actually not seeing wider public participation as such, and at the same time, actually inviting some challenges that could be unnecessary in a safer path.
Thank you. I have another question that came in from my center colleague, Andrew Cutchins. He asks, are there any external actors whose interests may have some influence over the succession of the supreme leader? Alex?
So, yeah, no, great important question. Iranian diaspora media is full of speculation about the role of foreigners, not in the context only of what happened to that helicopter. The usual suspects come out and are mentioned: Israel, United States, US was early on to come out and say we had nothing to do with it, as we heard from Secretary of Defense Austin. The country that gets mentioned in the context of the long-term trajectory of the Islamic Republic is Russia. Russia is arguably the most it might not be the biggest trading partner of Iran. It's not. It's below countries like China by far, but other countries like Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Turkey. So it's not a trading partner, but Russia is a political power in Tehran, and it has a group of people. I am assuming that is at the top of that list is at least a branch faction of the Revolutionary Guards, who consider Russia as an external protector of sorts of not just their regional or international agenda, their missiles, their nukes, but also as a convenient partner for them in their domestic competition for power. So that's the story in Iranian diaspora, the role of Russia in all of this. So when you hear the name Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of Supreme Leader Khamenei, everyone knows that the man grew up with the Revolutionary Guards. He comes from the ranks. He's wearing religious garb, but he's certainly a seminarian, but most of his time has been spent with men in uniform. And those men in uniform, they can't turn to the West. The United States isn't a place whose door they can knock on. And they've been knocking on the door of Russia for a long time. And over the last decade or so, they have more than just diplomatic niceties exchanged. There's actual evidence, plenty of it, of cooperation in the region, principally in Syria over the last decade. So there's a relationship. I still think there's plenty of suspicion across the board in Iranian society about Russian intentions. But if I had to put my finger on one country, say, this country definitely has a strategic set of grounds for making sure the Islamic Republic doesn't experience major political change, because major political change in Iran very likely will turn Iran away from its Eastern policy of looking to Russia and China and bring it where it was before 79, closer to the West. The Russians know that. that Iran is, I mean, Iranian commentators sometimes say Iran is second as important to Ukraine for the Russians. If the southern flank is opened up, if the Americans are able to come back, what would happen to Russian interest in its near abroad in places like South Caucasus, Central Asia, and so forth. So again, I just want to point out, I don't know the hard truths here, but I do know that Iranian commentators, particularly those who are free to express it in the diaspora, do look at Russia's role more than anybody else.
Hamid?
Yeah, of course, Russia is always named as its name is always referred to when it comes to issue of succession. And especially since the start of the war in Ukraine, I think the importance of Iran being on the side of Russia has become even more important. But, other than Russia's ties, or better to say, the IRGC officials' ties to Russia, which would actually go beyond that. And the person of Khamenei is actually the main supporter of closer relationship with Russia. So apart from that, there's some sort of what I would call an authoritarian understanding or authoritarian, sympathy growing between Russia and Iran, especially again in the past 3 years, with the kind of political space in Iran getting more limited, and this kind of politicization and securitization of public and political space ongoing. So this is actually a very important channel through which the Islamic Republic wants to preserve its role, its partnership with Russia, and of course also with China. There were reports, for example, about the agreement or a deal between Iran and Russia on cybersecurity and the broader cooperation on controlling the cyberspace, also with the help of Chinese technology. So this kind of triangle is become kind of vital in the authoritarian trend or authoritarian basically orientation of the Islamic Republic. So there's a reason why these are this sort of speculations. And also, on the side of Russia, I remember from my time working in Iran as a university professor. We were, of course, in touch with Russian colleagues, some of which having ties with the government. So one thing which would interestingly be mentioned from time to time was the understanding on the Russian side that the Iranian society is kind of primarily pro-Western and anti-Russian for the historical reason, etc., and also because of this kind of, again, authoritarian turn. So a kind of substantial change of any sort in the Islamic Republic would mean for Russia the loss of its influence and, of course, a lot of geopolitical consequences. So this is basically the deeper context of the growing partnership between Iran and Russia, I would say.
So had another question that came in from our audience. This one is from Laura Rosen, addressed to Hamid. Hamidreza, you mentioned the recent reports concerning Shamkhani. What is your sense of the role he may be playing, or were the reports mistaken, i.e. mistaken a track 2 for something else? Thanks.
Yeah, it seems to me that the reports had an element of truth, but not the whole of truth. So it depends. I mean, it will become kind of clearer, I think, in the next 3 days remaining for the candidates to register. So if Shamkhani goes and registers, I would say with a great deal of certainty that this was a kind of public opinion maneuvering by Shamkhani to sort of prepare the public and to project this image of him basically not leaving the scene, being there and continuing to impact the policies. Because interestingly, the report doesn't say, for example, that now that Raisi has gone, Shamkhani has taken over. It says that this has been ongoing for the past few months, which means since basically Raisi was still there and Amir Abdullahian. As I said, the context still is the Supreme National Security Council. As far as I know and we know from the public sources, there has been these kind of so-called advisory councils also affiliated with different, let's say, official institutions of power. For example, the Supreme Leader himself a few years ago established this council for strategic council for foreign relations, which is an advisory board for him. And then the foreign ministry, especially under Amir Abdullahian, established its own advisory council. So it might be that the Supreme National Security Council also has a board of advisors, and Shamkhani being part of that. So I couldn't find any evidence indicating to a greater role by Shamkhani in this whole thing as a person.
Thanks. We're coming up on the hour. We got about 4 minutes left, so I'll throw out one kind of final question for myself to both of you, which is, the nuclear file is obviously central to a lot of what Americans are looking at in terms of U.S. interests. That's a very central question, and I don't think the succession here for the president really changes anything, obviously. But the decision on weaponization in the context of what's going on in Gaza and the region, I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you about where you see that potentially headed and what's influencing it. We'll start with Hamid.
Yeah, I mean, there has been an unprecedented, of course, increase in the mentions by former officials, some lower-ranking current officials to this issue of weaponization. And also in the media, I mean, apart from what we can see here in the West, I mean, the media, it has become a routine case. So in a way, there has been, what I can say for sure is that there's a deliberate attempt at normalizing this discussion, because there was a time when, this was somehow a taboo, especially because it would be seen as jeopardizing the prospects for nuclear diplomacy. So two aspects are, at least two aspects are at play here, I think. So on one hand, it might have to do with Iran actually giving up hope on any sort of deal or understanding with the United States and the West overall over the nuclear file. So when there is no active, diplomatic track, why not to actually at least create some sort of a leverage for the negotiations? So this is, I would say, the more optimistic scenario. The more pessimistic scenario might be that maybe at least some segments or some factions within the military establishment, especially within the IRGC and its, of course, affiliates in the political scene, have really had kind of different ideas about the necessity of nuclear deterrence, and they are getting prepared actually for proceeding with the plan. So I don't think that, I mean, some people argue that as long as Khamenei is there, because of his fatwa, there's not going to be a change in Iran's nuclear doctrine. That's not necessarily the case, because, I mean, there's a lot of talk we can have on the kind of reliance of fatwa or of some sort. But I still don't see the strategic decision being made on the Iranian side for nuclear sort of deterrence. But it might happen as part of this whole transitional phase and transitional process to post-Khamenei. Once the ultra-hardline camp, for example, takes over, if for some internal, especially external reason, but also complemented by this growing domestic discontent, if they see regime survival at stake, they may go for the nuclearization in order to at least not open sort of two fronts at the same time, domestic and foreign. So these are different sorts of calculations that might be at play.
Alex?
Yeah, I know time is up, so I'll try and wrap it up in a few seconds. I just want to make a quick comment on Shamkhani. I mean, what we've heard in recent weeks from members, the vice president of President Rouhani coming out and saying Shamkhani, the person, was an obstacle in preventing the revival of JCPOA, really raises a lot of question in terms of is it a personality of the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council? Is it the personality? He's certainly a big personality. He's been there in the Islamic Republic from day one, because that sort of goes against the issue of the role and the centrality of the Supreme National Security Council. Are they just a rubber stamp body, as so many bodies in the Islamic Republic, or do you actually make decisions? That's one of the things we need to sort of look at more carefully. I agree with Hamidreza. I think the issue of weaponizing or not that we've seen being raised is about leverage. I don't see any reason why the Iranian regime wants to weaponize at this point. They have the bomb in the basement option. It works for them. They don't have to create more pain for themselves right now. They can be considered a nuclear threshold state. They are considered as one. Good enough. But I also say the other thing that probably keeps them away is they have no way of knowing what the United States will really do if the U.S. intelligence agencies actually found out that Iran is going for the bomb, which I don't think is the case. You know, we saw on the strike on Isfahan recently with the taking out of S-300, how much of that was the U.S. involvement and what the Israelis took claim for. The point is, the U.S. has options to sort of slow down that nuclear program. Surely the Iranians know that, and maybe they know where to stop and not push their luck too much.
I tend to agree with you. I hope we're right. I'd like to thank you both for appearing on the panel today. Really appreciate you making yourselves available and taking the time. We're going to wrap up now, and we will be posting video of this on our website later today with a link that you can share that we'll be sending out to participants. Thanks again, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.